something that we've been working on at Nestle for the past about 2 years now is really focusing on cleaning up our supply. And, you know, initially, you don't necessarily think that directly correlates to audience, but as I'm sure most of you know, cleaning up your supply will have a big impact on really understanding where you are, and then from there more easily connecting with your audience. So we've taken a three-pronged approach. We've partnered with tier 1 SSPs, and that's really where we started because nobody was focusing in that area, and it was there were a lot of unknowns there. What we wanted to do was form those tier 1 partnerships so that we could focus on a clean supply path and focus on building relationships via trusted partners. We've also now focused on DSPs, and the third path is publishers. So we're asking all of our local markets to partner with whom they select as their tier 1 local publishers so that they could start to become closer to the consumer and know who they're reaching without having that reliance on third-party data. It's something that our Nestle UK team did a couple years back, maybe 3 years at this point, and I think they were so ahead of the curve in doing so, and it's brought them immense benefits that you also saw come to fruition through the recent ISBA study by PwC, where the Nestle UK team performed quite excellently in comparison, partially because of these relationships. And I think probably one of the biggest misses of the industry is the thought that supply is separated from audience, but really you got to bring them together, and that's how we've been approaching it at Nestle.
That's really interesting to hear the sort of the three-tiered strategy of going through supply and then DSP and now to publishers. How big of a technical gap is there and an organizational gap between to get brands closer to publishers? Because those seem very far apart in our ecosystems currently.
You know, I don't think it's so much about, obviously there's so many technical components, but really it's all about knowing who is the best connected to your business, who is the most relevant to your business, and building relationships and partnerships. And there's enough people, there's plenty of people at Nestle who really do understand the technology side, and we're incredibly good when it comes to business. And we have all of our partners from the agency side and throughout the programmatic supply chain who can help fill any technical gaps that exist. But I think the media industry is really graduating from just thinking media and is graduating to elevate itself to start thinking about business. And that's where I think brands really excel, is understanding how it impacts the business. So when you connect to these various different in-market local teams, they understand quite well that this will have a business benefit, this will drive efficiencies, this will drive effectiveness, and thus has a very clear business focus.
Thank you for that. So Reese, this is a good time to sort of bring in the traditional middle person here. How do agencies sort of fit in there for understanding the inventory better and helping brands enable these strategies?
I think it's challenging our partners, you know, to Rachel's point, going through those exercises where you're cleaning your supplies, you're engaging with your top tier partners to make sure you're challenging them to better adapt and provide solutions that are, again, giving efficiencies and effectiveness for your brands. I think one of the things that we've done from an agency perspective is try to stick to being super proactive trying to stay ahead of the curve on, in terms of how this world is kind of evolutionizing and changing. And so I think doing like obviously cleaning your supply, but it's also about like trying to get a little bit more creative. So, if we know that cookies and consumer privacy issues are occurring and ever more so growing, then how do we kind of look to leverage spaces that are outside of it? How do we kind of look at connected TV or increasing our mobile spend? How do we then challenge our partners to provide more mobile opportunities as well? So I think it's kind of looking at it from a very like 360 degree angle in terms of how can we internally adapt and prepare our clients for the changing world, but how do we also kind of keep moving the needle and challenging our partners to also make changes on their end. So
there's both sides of that I want to explore. Let's first turn to Dentsu Aegis a little bit. And like, what are they doing that you can share to prep for that from a tech standpoint, from a program standpoint, or with clients?
I think M1 is definitely our biggest player, right? I think as an industry, M1 is something that is a great win for Dentsu Aegis and has shown great benefit to the kind of utilization that we have with brands that do leverage the data. But I think, again, it's just about, on a brand basis, how do we clean up our supply? How do we kind of look to utilize more of a clean room environment? And that kind of there's two parts to that. One is talking to the brands and saying, hey, you really need to like beef up your first party data. Have you thought about it? With some of the smaller guys, but for some of the bigger players, it's really like, how do we make sure that you guys are really utilizing the first party data and preparing for this future that's closer than we all anticipate, and that's again tapping into and having partnerships with really strong supply side partners that we know that we can really tap into and lean on to kind of build that data up. But I also think, some of it is just really making sure that, if we're looking at things like cleaning up our supply or looking at, things like beefing up first party data, what other considerations can we take into account? I think one big thing is like content is, and contexts are going to kind of grow in terms of not only usage, but need. And we're going to see kind of a flip, between like these behavioral, creative developments versus really looking at how do we understand our audience better and where they kind of are engaging the most. So it's kind of flipping it back a little and digressing in terms of digital advancements, but I think it's all good. It's all scary, but one of the things that is part of our industry as a whole is adapting. So we'll have to keep doing that.
Sure. And so Rachel, at the recommendation of the agency, beefing up your audience strategy, although this is not your agency necessarily.
They're one of our agencies. Yes.
That's true.
It's true,
we have all agencies.
Indeed. So from the recommendation of your agency and beefing up your audience strategy, how is that evolving? And then beware that I'm going to ask you a question about context.
All right. So this is one of the most interesting things I think going on in how brands are adjusting how they think about media. So there's so many layers to this, and it's incredibly nuanced and complex beyond just the technology part, but tied to planning. So we are shifting at Nestle to audience first advertising. This has been part of our ambition for the past 3 or so years, I would say, really in our e-business ambition statements, is that we will be shifting to an audience first strategy, an audience first advertising. And that means two different things. That means targeting the right people. Sorry, that actually means three different things. That means knowing who do we want to reach. It means building our media plans around those people that we want to reach. And then it means building the right creative to reach those audiences, and everything in between, from planning to execution. So we have a process at Nestle called Brand Building the Nestle Way, BBNW. And within that, there is BEP, which is brand experience planning. So don't think the jargon stops with programmatic, guys. Advertisers got it too. So we have brand experience planning, and we are completely relaunching the brand experience planning. And we've been working on this as a team, as a whole integrated team, with our global agencies, our creative agencies, our media agencies, our local teams, our global teams across functions for the past year. And we're shifting it to an audience first brand experience planning. So you start with your audience plan. Now, what that means is that every single brand and category has to know and has to build a framework for who they want to reach. And that's critical. And we've been conducting workshops for the past couple years that we call strategic implementation workshops, SIW. That's third jargon in the last 30 seconds from Nestle. And so our whole e-business team has been conducting these trainings, and a big part of it is how do you shift to audience first advertising. And it starts with the plan. So before we get to any technology and anything programmatic, it starts with the plan. And so now we're shifting all these campaign building processes to audiences. Now, once we know who we want to reach, you have to build the creative to reach those people. And we've launched what some of you might be familiar with, which is the Digital Media Center of Competencies. And we've launched this whole team, this whole in-house media team, to really focus on a few different things, but inclusive of cleaning up supply, shifting to audience first advertising, and doing so with the enabler of dynamic creative optimization. And this is where we get to your question and the specifics of it. You don't need, we've had a heavy reliance on cookies, but there's a lot of ways to reach audiences without cookies. Number one, we are super focused on building our first party audiences, but we want to do it the right way. It's very important to us to only reach consumers who have completely opted into the consumer communications. So it's a long process because we're doing it completely the right way. But you could also reach consumers based on their location, or based on content they've viewed, or based on contextual cues. And dynamic creative optimization technology can be really helpful with that, because you could use real-time feeds from events once they start up again, and weather, and where they are on the site. And this is another way that we could be relevant to consumers while maintaining their privacy if we don't have a first-party relationship with them, or if one of our partners doesn't have a first-party relationship with them. So it's a journey, but we're still very confident that we can achieve our ambition even with the demise of cookies.